Welcome back to another episode of OC and TJ. Week 5. We're already in October. Shocking. But it is your host, OC, a.k.a. Collin Callahan, a.k.a. the kid that has, the worst shampooed hair in the history of mankind. But we are back with another episode. And honestly, I'm too excited to get into this. So let us jump into it. Let us get it. Let me share this screen because this is going to take a while if I keep rambling on. Here we go. We are right onto the schedule. Only 2 teams remain undefeated. 3 of them have yet to earn their first win of the season, but everything can definitely change, within these matchups. Let's start with Thursday Night Football, where we have the Los Angeles Rams taking on the San Francisco 49ers tonight at 8:15 p.m. Wow, that kind of sounded like a catchy song there. We all know that this is going to be one of the more competitive grudge matches in the NFL. These two teams are definitely, as you can see on the right-hand side, they're tied with the division lead along with the Seattle Seahawks. So whoever wins this definitely has a stronger chance of getting that title. But if you're the San Francisco 49ers, a lot of the odds are stacked against you. And the biggest reason why is because of the amount of injuries that they are just constantly dealing with. They just ruled out Brock Purdy because he re-aggravated that toe injury. Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings, 2 of his top receivers, have been ruled out. Brandon Ayuk is still in IR. George Kittle is still in IR. Nick Bosa obviously is out for the season. So the only reliable weapons that Mac Jones, the backup quarterback, is going to have are Christian McCaffrey, Jake Tonjes, Kendrick Bourne, and Demarcus Robinson, who just got back from a suspension. So the only hope for the San Francisco 49ers is that you don't lose any more key guys. But last week, they just lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars 26-21, and yet you can't even blame the injuries as to why they lost. It was turnovers. 3 of them led to 17 points. The last one ended the game, meaning that if the 49ers found a way to hold on to the ball, they would have won the game because 2 of them led to Jacksonville's only offensive touchdowns of the day. The defense did whatever they could to keep Trevor Lawrence out of the end zone in the second half, and the only time that Jacksonville did reach the end zone in that span was because of a punt return. So the 49ers did nothing but beat themselves in that game, and to Jacksonville's credit, they just capitalized on their opportunities, and they, took advantage of a lot of bad and sloppy football. So if you're Mac Jones, this is going to be a way bigger test than your last 2 starts because, yeah, you got to beat the Saints by 5, and it took a walk-off field goal to beat Arizona, but this is the toughest opponent that you're going to play, especially since they're coming off 4 days rest of a home victory against Daniel Jones and the Indianapolis Colts. The reason why the Rams won? Well, it's because, Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua were just absolutely unstoppable. Stafford threw for 375. Puka Nacua, who's leading the league in catches by a wide margin, caught 13 more for 170, had the game-tying touchdown pass. And really, the Colts were in position to win that game, but 3 turnovers completely cost them. Daniel Jones threw 2 interceptions in a double coverage. Adonai Mitchell on what could have been an 87-yard touchdown fumbles the ball before even crossing the goal line, which is kind of reminiscent to how Jonathan Taylor coughed the ball up against the Broncos last year. And when the Indianapolis Colts did appear to take the lead to go up 27-20, a holding penalty completely wiped out the drive. And then the minute the Rams got the ball back, Tutu Atwell got wide open for the touchdown, and they put the game away 27-20. So knowing that this is a short week, I'm going to get straight into this pick. I'm going to pick the Los Angeles Rams here. They're at home. They're healthier. Their defense is definitely not one to underestimate. The offense is going to be in better sync. They're going to be in a better flow. And really, as long as they don't get in the wrong way, I think they're going to be in really good shape. And if you're the 49ers, you just better hope to God that someone has the game of their lives here because obviously there's no Nick Bosa. You don't have 3 of your top receivers. You don't have your starting tight end. Your starting quarterback is obviously out. So it is going to take a valiant and gutsy performance from either Mac Jones or Christian McCaffrey or whoever else the 49ers have on either side of the ball for them to really pull through and to, pull off a pretty surprising upset. But knowing what I know now, I'm going to pick the Los Angeles Rams to win this game 30-20. Yeah, I think the 49ers defense is going to give up 30 points. It's not necessarily going to be because of them, but because I don't really think that the 49ers offense is capable of, putting up enough points to take the lead. And I think given the personnel in the 49ers defense, I think this is one where they're probably going to wear out down the stretch. But we don't know. It's Robert Saleh's defense, so there's a good chance that the Rams might score either 20 or less. So we'll see what happens. Now we move on to an international matchup, the second week in a row. We have the Minnesota Vikings versus the Cleveland Browns. So just 1 week after Minnesota played in the first NFL game hosted at Dublin, they have to take on another AFC North team just across the pond in London, England, to play a little bit of a slightly inferior opponent, the Cleveland Browns. So Pittsburgh's obviously on a bye. They pulled out the victory 24-21. But to be quite honest, that game should not have been close in the slightest. I mean, that the Pittsburgh Steelers had that game in their lap from start to finish. They were up 24-6. And then in the fourth quarter, they just started to fizzle out. Offensively, they were getting in over their heads. Defensively, they let up a couple big drives, even though they did sack Carson Wentz 6 times and picked him off twice. And Minnesota actually had a chance to send the game into overtime, or shockingly, even more shocking, take the lead. But to Pittsburgh's credit, they held on the final drive and they managed to escape with a 24-21 victory. Why the Minnesota Vikings lost? Well, a bunch of different reasons. Number one, Carson Wentz was getting in and alive in the pocket. Like I said, 6 sacks, 2 turnovers. Pittsburgh was able to capitalize on their chances. Defensively, they were, on their heels for most of the afternoon. They were getting run all over by Kenneth Gainwell, who was the lead back because Jalen Warren was out with an injury. And Aaron Rodgers was just, slicing them apart with the quick game. And it showed early in the second quarter when he found DK Metcalf over the middle for an 80-yard catch-and-run score. So Minnesota definitely had a lot of things they needed to correct. But I think given the fact that they're going up against Cleveland, it'll be a little bit of an easier test. And I'm not saying offensively it's going to be, a cakewalk, because Cleveland's defense, for the most part has been relatively solid. They are giving up the fewest rushing yards in the league. They're still number one in total yards. Yet they're ranked near the bottom in points allowed. And a huge reason why is because their offense turns the ball over too much. They have a -6 turnover differential. That's the second worst in the National Football League. And it's so bad that they just benched Joe Flacco for Dylan Gabriel, obviously the rookie out of Oregon. So I think it was the right decision, because you knew at some point, given the situation that the Cleveland Browns were in, they're just it's such an abject mess that if you're not going to give Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders, then you're pretty much just forfeiting the season. And I think if you're Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, you're just hanging on to your jobs. So Flacco has been absolutely rough to start the season. Some of it is not his fault, but there are other times where you can't deny the numbers or you can't deny the throws. I mean, just look at last week against the Detroit Lions in the second quarter. The worst arm punt of an interception you could ever ask for to Kirby Joseph, where literally not a single wide receiver was in the area, and Kirby Joseph's like, oh, look at this, a Christmas present for me, and it's not even October yet. Thanks, Joe. He has been absolutely horrible. Joe Flacco has only 2 touchdown passes, 6 interceptions, and if you're Kevin Stefanski, you better hope that this pays off and that Dylan Gabriel breaks somewhat of a spark, because if they get absolutely run off the field on an international stage, on national television, then Jimmy Haslam, knowing him, he is not going to be afraid to make some big moves. Like, if you look at his history since he's been the owner, he's not exactly the most patient. He's not exactly the most patient individual, to tell you the truth. I think this is going to be a game where the Vikings win. They have more playmakers on their offense. I think their defense is more aggressive, but really Carson Wentz just has to make sure that he does not screw up if he's, being given the opportunity to start for the 3rd straight week. They haven't given like an official word on JJ McCarthy. They said he could. They said they're hoping that he could return to practice, but it's also a high ankle sprain. It's not like the NBA where, depending on the severity or depending on, the degree of pain you're dealing with, it's not like you could just, only miss a game or two and, you'll be able to come back. In football, high ankle sprains, they can take weeks, if not months, to, fully recover from them, just depending on, how bad the injury is. So I still think Minnesota will win, but it really just comes down to the offenses for me. I think it'll be surprisingly close, because we saw with Jackson Dart and the New York Giants last week, when you don't have tape on them, you don't really know what you're going to expect. So, they play vanilla on both sides of the ball, and you pretty much adjust on the fly from there. And, I think when you have Brian Flores and you have Kevin O'Connell, you have the brain power to say, okay, as long as we don't get in our own way, we're going to be in good shape here. And I think, we'll make enough plays, either in the first half or late down the stretch to make sure that we're not the ones playing from behind. So I'll say the Minnesota Vikings win this game 23-17. Now we get into the Sunday afternoon's festivities, and let's begin with this one here between the Indianapolis Colts and the Las Vegas Raiders. Indy is 3-1. Vegas is 1-3. Never thought I'd be saying that, entering week 5, but both are coming off pretty frustrating losses. I think if you're the Indianapolis Colts, it was definitely one you thought you could have won. I already pretty much explained to that, from their perspective, against the Los Angeles Rams. It was in their grasp. They lost by 7, but, 3 turnovers and 11 penalties were just, the 2 biggest factors into that defeat. The Raiders, on the other hand, let's put this in perspective. Their offense turned the ball over 4 times. Geno Smith is leading the league in interceptions, yet they only lost by 2 off a block. They lost 25-24, I should say, by 1 point off a blocked field goal. The world is that even possible? I mean, if it wasn't for Max Crosby, that game would have been a blowout. Without question. If they were going up against any other offense other than the Chicago Bears, they would have lost by damn near 20 points because Geno Smith was absolutely awful. Ashton Chaney was the only reason why their offense even had a spark because he scored all 3 of their touchdowns and he had his first breakout performance of his NFL career. And yet, all of a sudden, it comes down to Daniel Carlson trying to make a 53-yard field goal, and it gets blocked. I mean, Max Crosby was an absolute madman out there. He had 3 tackles for loss. He had 3 batted passes. He had a forced fumble, an interception that, set up Vegas' first touchdown of the day. Yet, in the second half, the minute that Geno Smith threw an interception on the first play, the Bears offense finally started to wake up. Caleb Williams was not being reckless with the football. He hit Rome Odunze in the end zone for a touchdown. They started the fourth quarter with a field goal. And when it was time to get in the end zone, they did so. They made the most out of their chances down the stretch. And while they were not perfect, they did enough to win the game here. And if you're Geno Smith, that loss is on you because you don't turn the ball over 3 times. Hey, you might have actually won the game. So, and I know you could have pointed out, well, why did they go for on 4th and 1 at their own 30? But yeah, 4 turnovers, it just does not help any team no matter who you're going up against. So I think the Colts are going to be able to pull this one out. I think it'll be really close because both teams are just very motivated to, get back in the win column. I think the Raiders are going to be a little bit more fired up because they're on a 3-game losing streak. Their offense has not been in sync. The defense, it's really only one guy, and it's the guy that I just brought up. And when you're the Indianapolis Colts, when you have a team that has an incredibly balanced offense with Jonathan Taylor playing at an extremely high level, where the passing game has really, developed and, come into its own, and the defense has not been as bad of a unit as they were the year before or the year prior, it's actually very heartwarming to see that the Colts are, trying to get their season back on track and that they're trying to make sure that they're not a punching bag this time. So I think the Colts will win in a very close game. I say the final score is 23-20. Could be off a walk-off field goal by Spencer Schrader, but we'll see what happens. Now we have the New Orleans Saints versus the New York Giants. Oh, boy. I don't think anybody is surprised that both teams do not have the best records entering this game for obvious reasons, but a lot of people are siding with the Giants in this one after they pulled off a 21-18 upset over the Los Angeles Chargers. The ultimate trap game for LA, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. Jackson Dart in his rookie debut looked pretty solid, to be quite honest with you. There was definitely room for improvement. He got sacked 5 times. I mean, Tuli Tuipulotu had 4 of them. And, Jackson Dart did exit the game briefly, due to an injury, but he was able to return. And, given that this was the first start, he didn't look too bad out there. 165 total yards of offense, 2 touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over. The offense was more energized. They were more motivated. He didn't look out of place. He didn't, put the ball in harm's way. He took what the defense was giving him. And, it gave a lot of Giants hope, which is something that they haven't felt for quite a long time here. And when they think, holy crap, we're going on the road to play the winless New Orleans Saints, they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a walk in the park. We're going to win this game by maybe 10 or 20 points, especially the way the defense played. picking off Justin Herbert twice, sacking him 3 times, you know, only letting one player, like, keep the offense in the game, which was Omarion Hampton. Yeah, there's a lot of valid hope for them to think, yeah, we might only be one game short of 500 here. But the New Orleans Saints, when it comes to this type of game, I'm not sure. I think the Saints are pretty capable of pulling off an upset. Obviously, they lost by double digits to the Buffalo Bills, which is honestly expected. But if you've looked at them through the first 4 games of the season, it's not like that they've been completely pulverized. The only time that they did get demolished was in week 3 against Seattle at Seattle. In the other games that they played in, they were in position to, capitalize on their chances and to potentially pull off an upset, but they just, they couldn't make the plays that they needed to get that job done. First game of the year against Arizona, potential game-tying touchdown pass to Juwan Johnson, it gets launched out of his hands. Potential game-winning drive the following week against San Francisco, strip sack by Bryce Huff. Against the Buffalo Bills, they had a chance to take the lead in the third quarter, and Brandon Cooks nearly had a touchdown in his hands that could have given New Orleans a second half lead, but it falls out of his hands, and they're forced to settle for a field goal, and down 21-19, the Buffalo Bills just figured out, okay, we got to get back in this game. There's no way in hell we're losing. Let's get back. Let's get refocused. Let's, make a few more adjustments, and we're going to be able to pull away. And that's exactly what happened. So, to be quite honest, entering this game, I kind of like the Saints' chances of getting their first victory. I think it'll be really close. I think both teams are extremely flawed on both sides of the ball. Offensively, they don't really have enough to, take down the bigger opponents. Defensively, they are one of the worst units in the league, which is kind of expected because you got Brandon Staley, in charge, and you don't really have, too many superstars on your team. You have good players, but you don't have any game-breaking talents. I think the only closest one you could think of besides Demario Davis is Carl Granderson, but that's just about it. The Giants, that their pass rush is going to, be their, the biggest backbone of this football team, but it's just offensively. If Jackson Dart can continue to improve and to get better and to make sure that he's elevating the team rather than, decrease their performance, then I think the Giants could be in the driver's seat. But I think the Saints, they are just extremely pissed off right now. They do not want to lose any more games. They're definitely not going to let their season get off to an 0-5 start. And at home against, a team that's pretty much in the same tier as them, I know that New Orleans is not going to be like, yeah, no, we pretty much have no shot here. Let's just forfeit now. I don't think they're going to give up. And through most of the season, they've been extremely competitive, and I think they can, beat the Giants at their own game. So, final score in this matchup, 24-21. Now we get to an AFC versus NFC matchup. We got the Dallas Cowboys versus the New Jersey Jets, who are 0-4. The Cowboys, on the other hand, are 1-2-1 after just tying with the Green Bay Packers, who are going to be on a bye week. Wow, that that was probably the greatest tie I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, both offenses were absolutely unstoppable. And just early on when you thought, okay, the Cowboys right on cue are going to get blown out. They're down 13-0. They're probably going to get their asses kicked by the Green Bay Packers once again. A blocked extra point that got recovered for a 2-point conversion gave Dallas the life that they needed to stay in this game. And the offense scored a touchdown not too long afterwards. They made it a one-score game. And then near the end of the first half, the defense forces a turnover. James Houston came around the edge, and it was recovered in the red zone. And just one play later, Dak Prescott found George Pickens in the end zone. And all of a sudden, the Cowboys are winning 16-13. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, they actually might have a chance of pulling off the upset. And what ensued throughout the rest of the second half was just an absolute shootout. Boom, touchdown, boom, touchdown, 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 touchdown. I mean, both offenses were just absolutely unstoppable. The quarterbacks were phenomenal. The defenses just had no answers. Micah Parsons was pretty much ineffective throughout the entire night. And when it was time for each of them to take the lead in the final minutes, they did so. And when Green Bay got the ball last, they kicked the field goal to send it into overtime, 37-37. Dallas received the ball to start the extra period, and they got all the way inside the 5-yard line, but it stalled out. Micah Parsons got credited for a sack on second and goal, and then on third down, this is really the turning point. I wouldn't say the turning point, but probably the one that I think Dak Prescott would have had to, would have liked back or liked to have back. He's looking to throw in the end zone, and he has Jake Ferguson open in the left side of the formation, but his eyes, they're not there, and he ends up throwing it away to the other side out of bounds, and they have to kick the field goal from Brandon Aubrey to take the 3-point lead. And Green Bay has 3.5 minutes left to go right down the field and score a touchdown. And not only could they not get that done, but they had the worst time management possible. I mean, think about this for a second. You run a play that gets tackled and bounced with, I want to say maybe 25 to 30 seconds left. It takes you forever to get the play off. And by the time you throw it away in the end zone, there's only 1 second left on the play clock. And you better be thankful that the clock didn't run out, or else the Cowboys would have won. And instead of, going for broke to, go for the win or take the loss, Brandon McManus, they kick the field goal, and it doesn't end it doesn't enter into a second overtime. It just ends the game with a tie. And I'm thinking to myself, after all this, we're not even going to get a win or a loss. Oh my gosh! I mean, it was exciting, but it was also just a little bit anticlimactic at the same time. So I know there are going to be plenty of Cowboys fans that are going to say, "Oh, this is definitely a moral victory for us." No, it's not. Anytime you tie in a game, there are no moral victories in it. You shouldn't feel like you won that game. You really shouldn't even feel like you lost that game. You should just be like, wow, okay, that just happened. Just a numbing feeling, to be quite honest with you. But to be fair, they definitely had a better feeling than the Jets did the previous night, because you want to talk about games where they got in their own way. The New York Jets do that better than any other team in the National Football League. I mean, they turned the ball over 3 times. 2 of them led to Miami touchdowns. But the worst part, I wouldn't even say the worst part, even more frustrating was the fact that they committed 13 penalties for 106 yards. Most of them were on the offensive side of the football. And this was a game that they could have won. I mean, on the opening drive, they just rubbed the ball right down their throats with Braylon Allen and Breece Hall and Justin Fields. It's 2nd down and 1 instead of the 5-yard line, and then all the momentum gets swung around when Jack Jones punches the ball out of Braylon Allen. The Dolphins fell on it deep in their own territory, and they go 96 yards for a touchdown, and they're up 10-0, where the Jets could have easily been up 7-3. I mean, if you told me that the Jets were going to run for close to 200 yards and that Justin Fields was going to have an outstanding highlight reel play near the second half that was going to make it a 17-10 game, I'd say, holy crap, the Jets might actually have this in the back. They might pull off this road upset, but no, they just made the most mistakes. They kept getting in their own way time after time after time. And the Dolphins, while it was a Pyrrhic victory because they lost Tyreek Hill to a gruesome knee injury, they stayed composed. They didn't lose their way. They didn't lose their focus, and they just made the least amount of mistakes. But having said all of this, I actually think that the Jets could pull off the upset here against the Dallas Cowboys here. And here's the reason why. Obviously, we all know that Dallas's offense is going to be the biggest reason why they stay in this game, okay? They didn't even have CeeDee Lamb last week, and they still put up 40 points against the Green Bay Packers defense. There's no shortchanging that. However, the Cowboys defense is absolutely horrible. It is awful. They are the worst in points allowed. They are the worst in passing. They are the worst in total yards allowed. If they're not dead last, then they're near the bottom. And the New York Jets, I mean, the offensive game plan is just very simple. Run the ball and throw it to Garrett Wilson. If you can't even figure out how to stop that, then you have no business being in the playoffs. But with the New York Jets, I feel like any offense going up against this Dallas defense can have their best game of the year. I mean, just look at the New York Giants in week 2 with Russell Wilson. Over 450 yards, and yet they only lose by 3 in overtime. With the Jets, they might have a chance of doing – they have a chance of repeating history. Because if you remember in 2019, the Jets hadn't won a game. The Dallas Cowboys were heavily favored. Sam Darnold was coming back from mononucleosis. And yet the Jets pulled off one of the biggest upsets of the year by beating the Dallas Cowboys by 2 points. So I think the New York is definitely capable of pulling off a surprising upset here. It's going to be really close. I think it'll come to overtime. But it's just Yeah, I just do not trust Dallas's defense at all. Nor do I trust the Jets defense because they have yet to come up with a single takeaway, and they're giving up the third most points in the league. So it's really going to come down to A, which offense is not going to make the one mistake that will end the game, and two, and more importantly, which defense is going to force the most amount of stops. And honestly, I feel like if there's any team that can play spoiler here, it's the New York Jets with Aaron Glenn as their head coach. So I'm going to pick the Jets to pull off a shocking upset, 33-30. Now we move on to, let's see, the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Denver Broncos. Philadelphia is undefeated once again. They're 4-0, yet they barely escaped after nearly blowing a 24-6 lead to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jalen Hurts, through the first half, looked like he was going to have an exceptional game. He went 15 of 16 for 130 yards with 2 touchdowns. In the second half, he threw the ball 8 times, 0 completions. 0 completions. A.J. Brown, 2 catches. Devontae Smith, let me pull up my notes here. Yeah, Devontae Smith, 2 catches. Dallas Goedert was their leading receiver with 37 yards, all while Saquon Barkley was getting absolutely shut down for the most of the afternoon. But why did the Philadelphia Eagles win? Well, because their defense made some of the biggest plays of the afternoon, and along with their special teams. Opening drive of the game, they blocked the punt, returned it all the way for a touchdown. Bucky Irving fumbles the ball. Boom. Philadelphia is already, blowing the game wide open. I think the final score was like 31-13 when Bucky Irving fumbled the football. So you're already in a bad position there. Late in the fourth quarter, you have a chance to, score a touchdown and, make it a one-score game again. Baker Mayfield tries to escape out of a sack, throws an interception as it was underthrown. And in the final drive, when they had a chance to tie it and send it into overtime, they couldn't convert on 4th down. So Philadelphia's defense made the biggest plays of that game to make sure that they weren't going to lose their first game of the year. While offensively, they were just doing everything in their power to be like, okay, Tampa, here you go. We don't really want to win. Unlike the Denver Broncos, who absolutely manhandled the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football, 28-3. Like, after the opening drive where Cincinnati stalled out in the red zone to kick a field goal, they didn't let the Bengals cross midfield throughout the rest of the night. Cincinnati was just so sloppy and undisciplined. I mean, they committed 11 penalties for 95 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins were absolutely shut down. They couldn't run the football. They're the worst rushing team in the league. And Jake Browning just couldn't even throw for over 130 yards on Monday night. Bo Nix, on the other hand, he didn't do too bad. Threw for over 300 yards, had a couple touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey, they were absolutely dominating the trenches. That's why they were able to win the time of possession the way they did. And if it weren't for a red zone interception by Bo Nix, that score would have been a lot worse. And if it weren't for a few boneheaded penalties, it would not have been 28-3. It would have probably been like 42-3 or something. It would have been a lot worse. So I honestly think that this is a losable game for the Philadelphia Eagles here because you know that the Broncos defense is absolutely legit. They have one of the best front sevens in all of football. They're giving up the second fewest points in the league. And Philadelphia's defense is not as strong as they were last year because, obviously, a lot of the veterans from that Super Bowl winning team are gone now. But it's also in Philadelphia. And the Denver Broncos have not won a game in Lincoln Financial Field or in that city since 1986. So Philadelphia has a home field advantage. And I think the way that the Broncos can win that game is if A, Jalen Hurts absolutely has one of the worst games of his career, or B, Bo Nix, puts the team on his back and leads the team to glory with, his big performance. I don't know if it's going to happen because Philadelphia's defense is still relatively solid. Like I said, it's not as great as it was last year, but it's definitely not one you want to underestimate. But I think given all of that, I think the Philadelphia Eagles, they find a way to get it done at home, 20-17. Now we get to the Miami Dolphins versus the Carolina Panthers. This is the final game of the early afternoon window. Already talked about Miami. They finally got their first win of the year. Darren Waller played in his first game since retiring a couple years ago, had 2 touchdown receptions. But at the same time, it was a Pyrrhic victory. They lost Tyreek Hill for the rest of the season. It was one of the nastiest injuries I had ever seen in any sport, let alone the NFL. and it's going to be a huge loss for what has already been a frustrating season for this football team. And the Carolina Panthers, on the other hand, they got absolutely crushed by the New England Patriots on the road. After the opening drive where the offense just walked right down the field for a touchdown, I thought, okay, maybe they might have a chance of winning, but as soon as they gave up an 86-yard return touchdown from Marcus Jones, it just deflated the entire sideline. The offense couldn't do anything with the ball until the backups took over in garbage time. The defense, they got picked apart by Drake May. They had trouble shutting down the run. Drake May was phenomenal. He had a rating of 155.6. The running game, they ran for well over 100 yards. The special teams was incredibly hard to stop because Marcus Jones had a few big returns for 167 total yards. And the Panthers, while they did cross midfield a few times, they just couldn't get the points that they needed. And they just got absolutely pummeled by a superior opponent. But the Carolina Panthers, to be quite honest, I don't think that they should be written off in this matchup because this is only their second home game of the season. 3 of their losses have been on the road, and they've been in humiliating fashion. But their first home game of the season, they shut out the Falcons 30-0 in a game where we didn't expect Carolina to win. So I think that if you're the Panthers, you got nothing to lose because you match up well against the Miami Dolphins. You know that both offenses are going to put up a ton of points. The defenses are going to be on their heels for the entire afternoon. And between two former Alabama quarterbacks, it's just going to come down to A, who's going to be healthy, and B, who's going to not screw up here? And having said all of that, when it comes to that second question, I think the answer is Tua. I think, when it comes to these quarterbacks, he definitely does not put the ball in harm's way the way that Bryce Young does. And more importantly, yes, Tyreek Hill is a big loss, but you still have Devon Achane, you got Jalen Waddle, you got Malik Washington and Darren Waller. You got enough playmakers on your defense to be like, okay, you got Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson and Minka. Like, you have enough veteran presence to be like, okay, when duty calls, somebody is going to find a way to get their hands on the ball. And with Carolina, they just had a hard time. They just have had a hard time gelling on both sides of the ball. And it doesn't really help that you're still dealing with a ton of injuries. You don't have 2 of your starting offensive linemen. You might not have Xavier Ligon. You don't have Jalen Coker. Ted McMillan and Chuba Hubbard, they've been on the injury report. So it's just they've had a really hard time trying to build enough chemistry. And I think the Dolphins slightly outduel them in that regard. So I think the Miami Dolphins are going to win this game 28-24. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. This is the last game of the 1:00 window. The Baltimore Ravens versus the Houston Texans. This is going to be incredibly boring. It is going to be sloppy. And I think the biggest reason why is because, the Ravens injury report is just outright gruesome to look at. Texans, to make a long story short, they shut out the Tennessee Titans 26-0. They couldn't even score a touchdown until the fourth quarter, but to their credit, offensively, they did enough. C.J. Stroud was a lot better than in the first 3 games of the season, even if it was against a pretty bad Titans defense. Cam Ward, once again, couldn't really get anything going. 10 of 26, no points. 2 missed field goals from Joey Slye in the first half that could have kept Tennessee in the game. And offensively, they just had no answers whatsoever, like they've had all season long. Even with a new play caller, it didn't really make a difference. So if you're the Houston Texans, you're like, okay, congratulations. You're not 0-4, and you didn't lose embarrassingly to this team the way you did last year. The Ravens, don't even pretend to give you that surprise look like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they lost to the Chiefs. They do this crap every single year. They tease us into thinking, wow, they have enough pieces to actually take them down. We've got Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, an outstanding defense. And anytime they go up against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, they get outright crushed. Do you realize that Patrick Mahomes has now won 6 of his last 7 games against Lamar Jackson? Do you realize that he is undefeated against this team at home? And just right on cue, anytime you think, okay, the Ravens had to have learned their lesson, nope, they get in their own way time and time and time again. They underutilized Derrick Henry. They tried to make it, Lamar Jackson or bust. That was supposed to be their game plan. And when that didn't work, their defense just got outright shredded. Patrick Mahomes threw 4 touchdown passes. Xavier Worthy, in his return from a shoulder injury, had 130 total yards from scrimmage. The defense returned to form. I mean, an interception from Leo Chenal really set the tone and, gave the Chiefs all the momentum that they needed after letting up a touchdown on their opening drive. And to make matters worse, Lamar Jackson hurt his hamstring in the third quarter and didn't play for the rest of the game. So it might be Cooper Rush starting for the Baltimore Ravens next week. And it's not just Lamar that might be out. The injury report is way too long. Ronnie Stanley, out. Marlon Humphrey, out. Roquan Smith, out. Nate Wiggins didn't practice. Kyle Hamilton didn't practice. Nnamdi Madubuike, out for the season with a neck injury. Calvin Noy missed the last few weeks with a hamstring. Kyle Hamilton didn't practice because of a groin. Literally, all of your key defensive starters and your best quarterback are not going to play. And now you're going up against a Texans defense that has given up the fewest points in the league and an offense that might have a chance of, picking up where they left off, especially the way that they looked against Tennessee. Because this Ravens defense has been outright putrid. So Texans are definitely going to be in a little bit of a tough situation, historically speaking, because they have yet to win a game at Baltimore. But I think if there's any chance to do it, it's going to be this week It's going to be this week when you don't have to worry about Lamar Jackson, when you don't have to worry about Marlon Humphrey or Roquan Smith or their two best pass rushers. If you don't find a way to win this game, you don't deserve to win the division. It is going to be unacceptable, and that massive changes are going to be made this upcoming offseason. So I'm going to pick the Texans to win that game 20-10. Now we get to the late afternoon window. First off, we have the Arizona Cardinals versus the Tennessee Titans. I already talked about Tennessee. They're terrible. To quote Cam Ward, they're ass. They absolutely suck. And the Arizona Cardinals, after starting the season 2-0, they lost their last two, and they're just coming off a 23-20 heartbreaking defeat against the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. Up until the fourth quarter, they were getting, I wouldn't say they were getting blown out, but they just kept playing further and further from behind. Their offense couldn't score a touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr. was absolutely awful. I mean, two of the interceptions that Kyler Murray threw in the first half were because of Marvin Harrison Jr. The first one was because he stopped on his route. The second one, the ball dropped out of his hands, and Seattle just, made the most out of their chances. Their offense was efficient. They ran the ball extremely well. Sam Darnold wasn't putting the ball in the harm's way, and all of a sudden, they're up 20-6, yet in the second half, the Cardinals defense was doing whatever they could to, try to get their offense the ball back. They held, Seattle's offense to 2 field goal attempts from Jason Myers up until Arizona finally got in a rhythm. They finally, got back into a groove. Marvin Harrison Jr. shook up all the bad nerves and all the, the rusty play and ended up having a pretty solid night, to be quite honest with you, really since the fourth quarter. And all of a sudden, it's a one-score game again. You're thinking, okay, all they need to do is force one more stop, and they're right back into this. They forced a field goal attempt on the next drive, their defense did, and Jason Myers pulled it wide. So Arizona's offense got tremendous field position, and to Kyler Murray's credit, they pushed the ball right down the field, and thanks to Amari DiMercato, they tied the game up. And then right on cue, the kickoff lands short of the landing zone. So Seattle got to start at their own 40. All they needed were a couple of big plays to get into field goal range. And in the nick of time, Jason Myers made the game-winning field goal attempt, and Seattle escaped 23-20. So this was definitely another game that Arizona had in their laps. But just like the week before against the San Francisco 49ers, their offense just could not make the most out of their opportunities. They kept playing from behind. This was the second week in a row where they couldn't score more than 20 points. And you were able to get away with it against the Saints and against the Panthers, but when you had to go up against two of your toughest division rivals, yeah, you kind of got exposed in that regard. But I think against the Tennessee Titans, they're going to bounce back, but this is going to be close. Because what did we see against Spencer Rattler, number 1, and Bryce Young, number 2? They had big leads. They had the game in their control, yet they kept doing everything they could to lose up until the defense finally forced the final stop for them to barely escape with the win. And against Tennessee, I am not going to be surprised if we see the same thing happen again. So, Cam Ward, hopefully you show up in the clutch, but I know Arizona's defense is really strong. They're well coached, and I don't think that they're going to let this bad of a Titans offense actually overpower them in their home building. So, give me the Cardinals to win 23-17. You got a few more Sunday afternoon matchups, but before we get to the primetime showdowns, Seattle versus Tampa Bay. I'm going to pick the Seattle Seahawks to win, and it's because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they are extremely banged up right now. They're not going to have Mike Evans. They might not have Bucky Irving. They don't have Kalijah Kancey. They don't have two of their starting offensive linemen. And you're going up against one of the best defenses in the National Football League. They're tied for the second fewest points allowed, tied with the Denver Broncos. They have a well-balanced offense that has looked pretty promising through the first four games. Well, really, since the second half against the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 2. Sam Darnold has not been putting the ball in harm's way. They're running the ball a lot better. Jackson Smith and Jigba is really coming into his zone as a number one option. The offensive line doesn't look like a total garbage heap. And the defense has really been the heartbeat of this team, all season long. So I think when you're going up against Tampa Bay, who doesn't have as strong of a defense and whose offense is looking a little bit brittle, I think at home, I think the Seahawks, this is their game to lose. So I think the Seahawks are going to win this one 27-24. The Detroit Lions versus the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Lions, they beat the crap out of the Cleveland Browns, which was kind of expected. They, benefited off of 3 turnovers from Joe Flacco. Their offense was well in sync. Jared Goff was efficient. Jahmyr Gibbs had a great day on the ground, which is honestly impressive considering they were going up against the best rushing defense in the league. And all Detroit had to do was just not get in their own way and, get off to a big lead early and keep their foot on the gas. And while an interception to Denzel Ward definitely hurt their chances, it definitely hurt to some extent. The final score is what it is, 34-10. And the Cincinnati Bengals, on the other hand, they just got blown out for the second week in a row. And without Joe Burrow, they have been absolutely pathetic. They just got blown out 48-10 on the road to Minnesota. And they just got pulverized 28-3 at Denver. Now you're going up against the Lions, who have a respectable defense, but more importantly, a way better offense than Minnesota's and Denver's combined. So, from a historical perspective, to be quite honest, this could be a little bit of a trap game for the Detroit Lions because they have now won a game in Cincinnati since 1993, and they've lost their last 7 games to this team, whether they have been at home or whether they've been on the road. But, hey, we've seen the Lions, end certain historical streaks in the past 2 years with Dan Campbell as their head coach. So to be quite honest with you, I feel like the same is going to happen here. Detroit is going to win this one handedly, 34-16. Washington Commanders versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Jaden Daniels is going to return, it looks like. He's on track to, make his first start back since suffering a knee sprain that forced him to miss the last 2 weeks. And both of them are coming off unfortunate losses. The Washington Commanders, they just, got run off the field by the Atlanta Falcons, and the Chargers fell into the ultimate trap game against the New York Giants. So Washington, they kept it close. They played competitive, but at the same time, their defense got absolutely torched by Michael Penix and Bijan Robinson and Drake London. Their defense had little to no answers for the entire afternoon. Yeah, they threw an interception, but the offense could only get a field goal after that drive. Marcus Mariota, he did fine. He wasn't absolutely great, but he wasn't terrible at the same time. He had 1 for 8 on third down, 2 touchdowns on, 9 to 10 drives. Certainly not enough to get the job done. And now that you're going up against a tougher Chargers defense, that's a top 5 scoring defense in this league on the road, the Chargers are going to bounce back here without a question. So I don't know how this Commanders offense is going to look. Jaden Daniels, that, he's going to try to, he's going to try to have a stronger game. But this is a really strong Chargers defense. They're going to try to make him win the game with his arm instead of, his athleticism. And if you don't have Terry McLaurin on the field, it's going to be even bigger trouble for them. So I know that the Chargers, they're going to be without 2 of their starting tackles, it looks like. But Washington, they don't really have a great pass rush. They're a pretty mediocre defense, if you ask me. I say the Chargers bounce back 30-22. Now we get to Sunday Night Football between the Patriots and the Bills. I'm going to make a long story short. The Bills are going to win here. As much as I would like to see the Patriots pull off this upset, they just do not have enough. First of all, they're up and down to start the year. 1 week they're good. The next day are absolutely horrible. And now that you're going up against the Buffalo Bills on the road, on primetime television, while they're debuting their Nike jerseys, yeah, unless Drake May has a near perfect performance or Josh Allen just absolutely implodes, I just don't see the Patriots winning this game. I think it could be close, but eventually Buffalo will find a way to pull through in the end. So I'll say the Bills win 31-20. And then last but not least, Monday Night Football between the Chiefs and the Jaguars. More or less the same thing. I mean, the Jaguars defense is a lot better than it was last year. I mean, they lead the league in takeaways. They're top 10 in several statistical categories. But the Chiefs offense is healthier. Their confidence is back. Their swagger is back. And I think, now that they're entering October, they know that they have to stack enough wins as possible to make sure that they get back in the division race. And knowing that the Chargers just lost last week, they have a real strong chance of, getting back into the hunt and making sure that, they return to the form that we've been used to seeing from them in the past. So I think that the Jaguars could put up a good fight, but Trevor Lawrence is going to have to outplay Patrick Mahomes from start to finish for them to, have a chance of doing that. They are at home, so Jacksonville does have the crowd advantage, yet this is the Kansas City Chiefs. This is not exactly the team that a lot of people want to bet against. And when you do, you're probably going to be wrong 95% of the time. So Chiefs will win 30-17. And with that, the game picks are officially locked. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. I appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you next week with another picks episode.